Sikkim is the bowl between the Kanchenjunga Massif to the west and the main Great Himalayan Range itself, as it makes a sharp southeasterly turn. Cutting through on a north-south axis is the Tista, with its source in the Trans-Himalayan Shorten Nima range. Suspended between the glaciers and the jungle, Sikkim is a Shangri-La among high mountain gorges. In fact, in the olden days, it was called the Hidden Land, Basyum, embedded in the walls of the Himalayas. Huge peaks, 6,000 to 8,000 meters, crowd this hilly, fertile land, the hidden rice valley of the old texts. To the southwest, along the main range, is the pride of the Sikkim Himalaya, Kanchenjunga. A zong is a fortress, and even a look from afar at Kanchenjunga's buttresses and icy pinnacles confirms it as an apt name for this redoubtable mountain. Sikkim occupies a unique position in the Himalayas due to its incredible biodiversity, and this is itself the result of one of the world's steepest altitude gradients. From the plains of North Bengal to the top of world's third highest mountain, Kanchenjunga, is an ascent of 8,000 meters in just 100 kilometers as the crow flies. In between are flora and fauna ranging from the tropical to the Palearctic denizens of the higher altitudes. Sikkim is like a greenhouse. Over 4,000 species of everyday and exotic plants, including 454 known species of orchids alone. They were identified by one of the greatest explorers that Sikkim has ever known, Sir Joseph Hooker, who later collaborated with Charles Darwin on his Origin of Species. Hooker identified a large number of the bountiful flora of Sikkim and later chronicled them in his Himalayan journals published in the middle of the last century. He identified 3,000 plant species, including 150 species of ferns alone. But it is the orchid family which is very well represented in the Sikkim Himalaya. Actually, for the botanist, the story just goes on and on. The primulas of Sikkim can send anybody into raptures. We now go beyond the Great Himalayan Range to the birthing grounds of the Tista, atop a 17,600-foot high plateau in the Sikkimese Trans-Himalaya, just short of the Indo-Tibetan border. Here, in these desolate wastes, the Tista gathers momentum, joining a select fraternity of Himalayan rivers, those which cut across the great Himalayan watershed. We are now beyond the Lachen Valley, in the country of Tista's birth. A truly wild and awe-inspiring landscape that has given birth to a truly wild and untamed river. The Tista is the main architect of Sikkim's landscape, and it takes its birth again Beyond the axis of the main Great Himalayan Range, in the snowfields and glaciers of the 7,000-meter Chotem Nimila group, where it has carved out for itself a narrow gorge, which is partly due to tectonic and partly due to climatic reasons. Here in the shadow of the Great Himalaya Range live the Bhutias, tribes of Tibetan extraction who are the natural heirs to this high-altitude wonderland. After its plunge through Sikkim, the Tista meets up with the Rangit. Also originating in the southeastern glaciers of Kanchenjunga, the Rangit has carved out the valley overlooked by the colonial hill station of Darjeeling. Sikkim is overwhelmingly Mahayana Buddhist. Buddhism came here during the 16th century in rather unusual circumstances, as we shall see in today's Culture Watch. Gangtok, the capital of Sikkim, is now a Himalayan metropolis and well on its way to becoming a concrete jungle like Shimla. However, it still retains some of its old world charm to be an essential halt on any tourist itinerary. Gangtok is home to the unique Sikkim Institute of Tibetology that promotes and conducts research on the language and tradition of Tibet, as well as on Mahayana Buddhism. It has one of the world's largest collections of books and rare manuscripts of the Tibetan Mahayana school. Here too is one of the finest collections in the world of astonishingly beautiful and incredibly finely worked silk tankas depicting the Buddhist cosmology. All around are religious works of art. The Tista Valley receives intense rainfall even for the eastern Himalayas, which in any case averages more rainfall than the western Himalayas. This is probably due to the unique positioning of Sikkim vis-a-vis the plains of Bengal. There is a height differential of 2,800 meters between Siliguri and Darjeeling in just a short stretch of 30 kilometers. Consequently, the monsoon hits the lesser Himalayas around Darjeeling just as it hits the slopes of the Shillong Plateau, where Cherrapunji, one of the rainiest places in the world, is located. Out of a total estimated 5,000 orchid species in the world, Sikkim covers over 10%. The majority of Sikkim's orchids are the sort which attach themselves to trees and rocks, rendering Sikkim's landscape a psychedelic tapestry. A tapestry increasingly under attack by the insidious forces of so-called development. Forest cover of the surrounding hills has been a victim of depredatory felling and mismanagement, with the result that forest cover of nearly 70% at the time of independence has plummeted to a shameful 25%, and that too by not very conservative estimates. Over the last 200 years, Sikkim suffered extensive deforestation, thus exacerbating the destabilizing effect of heavy rainfall. In addition, the rocks in the region are comparatively fragile, the strata consisting of sandstone, shales, and quartzite. Landslides are thus common all over the Teesta Valley. The Teesta and its major tributaries like the Rangit bring down what is probably the highest sediment yield of all the Himalayan rivers, and in turn impart to Sikkim what is probably the highest denudation rate in the entire Himalayas. The Teesta, as we have seen, has always been considered a very wild and unpredictable river. Until 1787, the Teesta flowed into the Ganga, when after an extremely destructive flooding, it changed its course and joined up with the Brahmaputra. This was at a time when its catchment was still clothed with very thick forests. What remains of these forests is home to some of the most rampant biodiversity observable anywhere on Earth, a Himalayan Galapagos. Darjeeling in the 90s has recovered from the separatist disturbances of the 80s, but has since fallen prey to the tourist wave sweeping across the Himalayas from the west to the east, turning our hill stations into environmental kill stations. Rest and recreation, the raison d'etre behind the settling of Darjeeling, seems an impossibility this summer. Over 5 lakh tourists are swamping the town, where the public utilities were designed and installed over a century ago to cater to the peak season demands of around 20,000 people only. The whole story is so achingly familiar, just substitute Simla, Dalhousie or Manali. Another dubious distinction acquired by Sikkim in the last 2 decades of development is one of the highest road densities in the Himalayas. 12 kilometers of road for every 100 square kilometers, as compared to only 0.44 kilometers to every 100 square kilometers for neighboring Bhutan. The first ever ethnographic survey of Sikkim was carried out as late as the 1980s by the Anthropological Survey of India under its People of India project. It identified present-day Sikkim, like any other state in India, as a multilingual, multi-ethnic and a multicultural identity with 25 distinct communities. The original inhabitants are the Lepchas, followed closely by the Bhutias, while the rest of them consider themselves as migrants. The Lepchas are now shrunk to a minuscule minority, and some traditions seem at the end of their road. In this village hut, an exorcism is in progress, an arcane ritual harkening back to a pagan pre-Buddhist past. The Yaba, as the exorcist is known, is the last of his line. His is the last family in all of Sikkim to conduct these rituals, and the tradition will probably die with him. The Bhutias came later from the Chumbi Valley in Tibet and were adept traders setting up links with southern Tibet and Bhutan. Highland people, they prefer the cooler heights to the humid valleys. The Langchempa are one of the most important of the high-altitude Bhutia communities. Living in the wild country of Tista's birth, the community derives its name from the valley that it inhabits. Like other high-altitude mountain people, the Lachins are basically herdsmen migrating from the high summer pastures to their winter dwellings. Last but not least came the Nepalese, and they are the majority community today. Industrious and hard-working, they have secured for themselves an important niche in Sikkimese society. In recent years, like in other parts of Himalayas, Sikkim has been opened up for development. However, the results are not entirely wholesome, so thankfully, industrialization is still far away. With sartorial uniformity being imposed by the developmental process, it's only a very few communities that still stick to their original mode of dressing. A majority of the Lepchas and Bhutias today are Mahayana Buddhists. The Lepchas were forest foragers and small patch cultivators who worshipped nature spirits. The introduction of Buddhism to the lepchas took place as a result of factional strife amongst the Tibetan Buddhists in the 15th and 16th centuries. The great schism in the Tibetan church between the yellow hats and the red hats was naturally a result of far more than just a dispute between the color of the hats. At the root lay the Reformation in Tibetan Buddhism, introduced by Dipankar Srijan or Atisha, an Indian Buddhist monk who visited Tibet in the 10th century. Atisha preached celibacy and moral abstinence and weighed heavily against the tantric arts. The unreformed residue, the Nyingmapa or the Old Order, continued to draw inspiration from the great mystic yogis of the time and trace their descent from the great guru Milarepa. Milarepa, who is revered by all northern Buddhists across the Himalaya, started as a practitioner of the black magic arts for the purpose of revenge against the tormentors of his family, rather like a Hindi film story. As later purification, he underwent labors resembling those of Hercules imposed by his guru Marpa, ultimately emerging as a supremely powerful yogi. The divide between the followers of the two sects deepened over the centuries, and as the Gelugpa sect headed by the Dalai Lamas gained ascendancy in Tibet, the Nyingmapa sect sought refuge in Sikkim. Consequently, Sikkim has become the site of Himalayan Buddhism's most important monasteries. It was here at Yugsom, during the conclave between three Tibetan lamas fleeing the Gelugpa orthodoxy, that Sikkimese Buddhism first took root. The conversion of the nature-loving lepchas was a foregone conclusion, considering that Buddhist philosophy at no point clashed with their earlier belief in nature spirits. The Tashiding Hill, Pemayangse, the entire area is hallowed ground for Sikkimese Buddhists. The modern world throws up its own challenges, but like the incense of the juniper these young lamas are burning, flooding the air, Buddhism in Sikkim seems to be holding its own. Beyond the axis of the Great Himalaya Range are the stupendous wastes of the Sikkimese Trans-Himalaya. Here the 7,000-meter-high Shortem Nima Range serves as the frontier, with Tibet just a few kilometers away. The landscape is dominated by the Gudogmar Lake, the largest lake in Sikkim and one of the sources of the Tista. Gudogmar at these altitudes is frozen year-round, except for a small portion which never freezes, probably due to a subterranean aquifer carrying heated water. The infant Tista meanders across this high-altitude plateau, which becomes like a marsh when the snow melts. Here at an altitude exceeding 17,500 feet, where all one expects to find is inanimate rock, we come across a large group of an eastern Himalayan variant of the Bharal. It is fascinating to observe a species that has evolved to fit into such a harsh terrain and climate. Low oxygen levels and constant high-velocity winds don't seem to matter a whit to them as they gaily trot about, though when they settle down, they try and get as low down as possible. Presumably, the winds do bother them when they are not moving about. The boggy valley floor with its stunted grasses provide their food, and the summer months are spent at this altitude with the herd only moving down in the fall. Winter is spent at altitudes between 12,000 and 14,000 feet.